Hey, let's talk about compression. It's something that it seems like there's a lot of confusion or cloudiness around compression and if you should have it or what you should use it for. Should you have it in your live rig? And I, for the most part, always had a compressor of some sort. I think the first time I had an experience with compression was on my first amp, which was a PV Mark IV. It was a 200 watt bass head. Lots of guys had them back in the 80s. And the PV amp had this thing, it was called Ddt Compression. And if you crank the amp all the way up, it had a light, a DDT light, and it would come on. And back then, I was playing in a heavy, probably a metal band, I would say back then. And I always had my amp as loud as I could get it. And it was always engaging that DDT compression. And it was some sort of real compression. There was no settings for it, but it did compress the sound. And I kind of got used to that sound. I definitely liked it. And later on, when I got a real quote unquote bass rig with a rack and everything, that was really cool at one time to have a rack full of gear. And I had a DBX one something or another. I can't remember. It was a 166. It was a rack mount compression device, and I used that all the time. I used it for a long time. And had some other basses, and I always tried to have some sort of compression. And then when I started playing, when I kind of got out of playing rock as much, it wasn't a big deal. I played in a country band for a couple of years and really didn't need compression in that. And I played in a band that got together every Christmas and did a lot of Christmas songs, and I really didn't need compression in that. And if I played, there was one particular band I played with once in a while. They were acoustic guitar based, and I didn't really need compression for that. But when you play heavy rock music, compression can be an advantage. And what it does is it basically evens out your notes. I had a Ampeg V4 all tube amp, and that amp had really great natural compression. It was a tube amp, so unlike an SVT, an Ampeg V4 you can crank up and still have your hearing. If you've ever played or spent any time playing through an Ampeg SVT, I used to play at a particular club, and they had a stage rig, and the bass amp on the stage rig was an Ampeg SVT, and I don't think I ever turned that thing over 3 or 4, because it would just tear your head off. And the Ampeg SVT is actually, at the volumes I was ever able to play it, is actually a really clean amp with a ton of headroom. Versus the V4 could actually, I think it probably sounded like an SVT cranked all the way up without, quite as much volume. And, there was a natural compression in that amp. And when the more you dug in, the more it would compress your playing. And a compressor on any amp will do that as well. You can use a solid state amp with a compressor. This amp that I have in front of me has a compression effect built in. It doesn't have a lot of adjustability. I think one of the knobs is probably the compression ratio, and the other knob is some sort of combination of the attack and release. I'm not really sure, but I just kind of fiddle with it until it sounds about right. As far as bass compression goes, I typically set it somewhere between 3 and 5 to 1, somewhere in there. And as far as the attack, when I had the DBX, the attack and release, I probably started off with both of them at 12 o'clock, And I seem to remember backing both of them off a little bit till it sounded right. This particular thing, which has this combination attack and release, I have it somewhere around noon. You just kind of have to experiment with what sounds right. If you can hear the compressor as an effect all the time, that's typically not what you want. So I'm going to demonstrate. So right now, this has compression on it. Compression really makes slapping and popping sound great. It really brings that out. It gives the slapping and popping kind of like an evenness. And when we hear recordings of slapping and popping, are typically compressed pretty heavy. So it's the sound we're used to hearing. I've got this thing tuned down to D. I forgot about that. I was thinking about some of the recordings that are great examples of compression, and one of my favorites is Billy Sheehan. He has a bass part on the song. It's a song called Yankee Rose, and it's like something like that. I can't remember. I haven't really I haven't heard the song in years, and I probably haven't tried to play it in 25 years, but it's something like that. But he has that's a good recorded example of a really good compressed bass tone. But I'm going to turn the compressor on here. Right, it's been on, but I'm gonna make it so I can adjust it. And I'm going to give you an example of, I'm going to really crank the compression up and really choke it down. Now it's like an effect. If I hit the string lightly, it's loud. Much louder. You can hear the compression release. Hear the volume going up. Then when I hit it, it clamps right down. That's not the way I like to have it set. I don't like it as that obvious. So that would probably be with the compression ratio, I don't know, probably 6 to 8 to 1. And it really, the attack or the release turn, so it's really engaging and just choking everything down. And that tends to take all the character out of your bass. It removes all the dynamics. So what I like to do is I like to back that off. And we'll back the compression off to, say, or somewhere around 4, 3, 4, 5, somewhere in there. And we'll take the release and we'll kind of get those in the middle, or maybe the attack and release maybe a little bit to like on 4 instead of on 5. Or, if you're up and down, at 11 o'clock. And now I've got a compression that if I dig in, it will kick in. But if I play a light, I can play light enough to not engage the compression. The compression only, you only hear it when I dig in. There, that sounds compressed. If I play a light, it doesn't sound compressed at all. But if I dig in, it compresses. And that's kind of the way, about how I like it set. That's back to, I reset it. This is my normal setting. So it's not quite as extreme as what I just had. You can really hear it kick in there. But I would never play that hard. And that's what I use compression for. It's basically, it evens out my tone. If I get a little excited, it'll kind of cover that up. It'll even my volume out. And I also just like that sound when I dig in. You get that compressed sound, and it really actually especially with rock or metal or those sorts of things, that sounds awesome. It really helps solidify the low end. With other types of music, jazz, country, acoustic musics, I'm not sure if it's that necessary. I think you can get away without having it. Really, the most, as we start talking about what effects we should have, the most important effect that you should have is a tuner. I found that is the most important effect that I've ever owned. Just having my own tuner. So I could check my tuning at any time I wanted to make sure I was right where I was supposed to be. That's made me sound better than any other effect I've ever been able to put in my signal chain. So hopefully that was not too terribly boring. Thanks.